character as a system of memes. Character is here defined as a recognizable, distinguishable pattern. In being distinguishable, it must be different to other things of its kind. In being recognizable, it must be able to return so it can stand a chance of being identified again. Character does return because it is contagious. When we begin to talk about the contagiousness of character, the fact that it can be passed on from one host to another, we are thinking of character in terms of a system of memes. Memes, conceived in Richard Dawkins' original sense, are units of cultural inheritance. In this, they are the cultural analogue to genes, which are units of biological inheritance. There turn out to be many similarities in the behaviours of genes and memes. Where biological organisms reproduce their genetic information by leaving copies of it in their offspring, as cultural organisms, human beings reproduce ideas, stories, and norms through tradition. Both genes and memes are transmissible vertically and horizontally. Where vertical reproduction consists in passing down genetic or cultural information to the next generation through reproduction or tradition, respectively, horizontal reproduction consists in the transmission of this information across generational peers, horizontal gene transfer, or contemporary culture. As they are transmitted, units of cultural information, memes, can evolve over time, just like genes can. This is because, like genes, memes get copied again and again, and each time they are copied, there is a chance that a mistake will be made in the process. This mistake is called a mutation. If the mutation alters the meme in a way that makes it likely to be copied again, then the family of memes to which it belongs is likely to evolve in that direction. An example of a meme is waving with your hand to indicate a greeting. Waving is a unit of cultural inheritance. It is a gesture which our caregivers transmit to us in early childhood when we learn to greet. This single choreographic routine is repeated through tradition, vertical transmission, and reinforced in daily practice, horizontal transmission. Each time someone waves at someone else, the meme has been copied, transmitted, and reinforced in cultural memory. Through history, waving has evolved in different places and different times, so that we can now identify a few different styles of waving. One famous waving meme is the royal wave. The way in which members of the British royal family wave at their subjects appears to amuse spectators no end, because it is markedly different to how just about everybody else in the country waves. As in evolutionary biology, when we examine patterns of the evolution of waving, we can only speculate as to why such divergences in waving have arisen, based on the degree to which the mutation serves the purpose of propagating itself again in the future. An evolutionary change in a meme usually, but not always, happens because it benefits the host in some way, so that the host is likely to perform the meme. In biology, if a genetic mutation leads to an evolutionary trend in the direction of the changed trait, sharper teeth, greater camouflage with the surroundings, or keener hearing, it is usually because it benefits the survival rate of the creature hosting the genes in its body, since all the genes that were not beneficial to their hosts typically died out with them. We can speculate that the royal family has evolved to wave in this way out of some ancestral benefit to their social class, since people outside their class do not wave in this way. The wave, reserved, is less energetic and eager than most other waving styles. This restrained wave, along with other historical European aristocratic and royal habits, such as wearing stiff clothing that limits movement, served perhaps to differentiate these classes from the toil and labour associated with others by communicating a lesser need to expend energy. In this way, we can see how the royal wave, in concert with other memes, may have served to reinstate social distance and thus power. If the royal wave meme helped members of the royal class sustain their power in any way, however negligibly, it was likely to be repeated and thus transmitted amongst its hosts through time. Another analogue we can draw between memes and genes is the difference between latent and expressed inherited information. Each biological organism has a genome, a complete recipe that encodes its biological makeup. These recipes, residing in DNA form in every single one of our cells, bar red blood cells, are constantly being read by our bodies and causing things to happen within them in the continual labour it takes simply to be. Sometimes it is clear to see how parts of this recipe, genes, code for characteristics such as eye colour. Most of the time, the link between the genome and the resulting characteristics of the organism cannot be made so directly, and instead the characteristics arise, are expressed epigenetically, which is to say, in concert with all the micro-choreographies going on in the body and in the environment beyond genes alone. When an individual displays a characteristic because of its genes, we say that the gene for that characteristic has been expressed. Sometimes an individual may have a latent gene, whether it is physically located somewhere distinctly in the DNA molecule or dispersed epigenetically, that encodes for a characteristic that does not get expressed. This is why genetic diseases can skip a generation or two. Its hosts may not be ill as a result of carrying the gene, without it being expressed, but this does not prevent it from being passed on and expressing itself in offspring. Just as individual characteristics belonging to an individual can be latent or regularly expressed, my observations of my performance practice suggest that character, as an entire system of memes, can also be carried by a human host without necessarily coming into expression. If my performance practice acts as a way of switching on latent characters I have inherited but not previously expressed, this would explain why I occasionally find myself carrying out never-before-performed systems of behaviour with unexpected familiarity and readiness, sometimes even with ease, as I demonstrated in the tutorial video of my practice, Self-Estrangement as Method, Part 2. The character I slipped into in that video performance, I had never prepared, designed, or rehearsed before, and yet it came across with considerable consistency and was distinct from other characters I have performed. Character is caught via memetic contagion. It then may or may not come into expression, but the potential for it to surface remains. The stern look with sword held across face is part of a larger system of memes that make up a character like Mulan. When I repeat this action in the image of my imitation above, this is an instance of a meme coming into expression in a new host. And something funny to point out at this point, I don't know if you noticed, but in that comparative photograph of myself as a child copying Mulan's gesture with the sword, I actually copied it kind of wrong, so I'm holding the sword horizontally rather than vertically. So that's an example of a mutation in the copying process. Using virus-related terminology, such as contagion or host, with reference to memes, is common, as when we hear about an internet meme going viral. After all, a biological virus is pretty much just some genes encapsulated in a membrane, with nothing else but its own possible repeatability and the assistance of host organisms to propagate it. Character, too, can be thought of as a free-floating behavioral script that is contracted and then transmitted amongst human beings, intervening in their lives in the meantime. Daniel Dennett goes so far as to offer a definition of the term person as, quote, a hominid with an infected brain, host to millions of cultural symbionts, end quote. For Dennett, a person acts as a vehicle for propagating these cultural symbionts through time and space. To illustrate this, he gives the biological analogue. When we see a seed floating airborne away from a great old tree, we tend to say that the tree is reproducing, with the tree as the active subject in that sentence. A more accurate way to put it, perhaps, is that the entire scenario, the painstaking growth of the tree, its tireless photosynthesizing, the architecture of the seed and its parachute-like wings, all of this acts as an apparatus in the service of the little DNA molecule tucked away inside the seed. After all, genetic information is the only thing that survives. The biological apparatuses that temporarily house it and then pass the baton on to the next generation wither and die in the service of the great relay race of life. So Dennett's point there was that, in a way, you could say the tree is reproducing by dispersing its seeds, but maybe the tree is just a big sort of vehicle for the real thing that's producing, which is the gene. At the risk of continuing to provide a bleak portrayal of our human predicament as gene and meme receptacles, here is a familiar assessment of our relative passivity in the task of becoming, this time from Erving Goffman. And he says, in analyzing the self, then, we are drawn from its possessor, from the person who will profit or lose most by it, for he and his body merely provide the peg on which something of collaborative manufacture will be hung for a time. And the means for producing and maintaining cells do not reside inside the peg. In fact, these means are often bolted down in social establishments. So here again, he's taking away the centrality of the sense of a person's agency from a single individual by describing an individual, a person, as this kind of peg upon which, let's say, characters are hung on for a time. But characters are of collective manufacture. This character does not come from this person, this peg. It's rather society and social establishments that produce the possible characters we can become, and then these are hung onto the peg for a time. So the receptacle which hosts character, which hosts the memes, has been variously called a person by Dennett, a body, or even a lowly peg by Goffman, and a human being by me. So in this thesis, I'm using the term human being as that thing which is carrying character, playing out character. Likewise, what Goffman is here calling a self, he has earlier in his text called a character. As mentioned earlier, terminology poses a significant challenge in research on the mechanics of self, reflecting a wider ambiguity in meanings in specialist literature, as well as lay usage. So here I'm going to clarify some terms for the purposes of what we're talking about here. For the purpose of this research, I will take the human being to mean that which is capable of playing out character, where the verb to play is intended to draw associations to a machine playing out a script or a computer running a program. Human being is preferred to human body, as it does not presume the basis of this character-playing machinery, remaining strategically open with regard to its physical constitution. So I don't want to limit our idea of what a human being is to the boundaries of our skin and our bodies. Clearly, we associate very, very heavily the individual body as a sort of receptacle for a person. But I want to be a little bit more loose with it. So instead of talking about body, the human body as the thing which is carrying character, I'm going to talk about something a bit more abstract, the human being. So whatever the human being is made up of, you know, is it me, or is it also my clothes, or is it also the apartment I'm sitting in? So I'm not going to define the boundaries of what a human being is, but let's just say the human being is that thing, whatever it is made up of, that is playing out characters. Where was I? Yeah, so meanwhile, reference to the human being rather than a being in general roots us in our focus on the subcategory of characters that are frequently played out by and transmitted between human animals. Because as I said earlier, we can think about the character of this cup, for example, but in this particular thesis, I want to talk about character as in personality, you know, the sort of system of characteristics that are adopted by what we typically call people. Right. Although referring to the human being as a machine for character, or a vehicle for memes, or a peg upon which communally generated attributes are hung, may appear to devalue human agency, rather than dismiss it entirely, perhaps a deeper understanding of how character lives and passes through the human can change the way in which we think about where the value of the human is located. Foregrounding the relative passivity of the human being here merely serves to emphasize the capacity of the human being to be possessed by a character, and the capacity of character to be shared between human beings. Before we return to jealousy, the final comment I wish to make about character as a system of memes is the way in which communication technologies have throughout history served to lubricate the transmission of character between human beings. According to Dennett, language has been the chief technology enabling the transmission of what he's calling symbionts or memes. However, we live in a time of particularly rapid innovation in telecommunication, right? Computers, internet, social media, etc. TV everywhere, media everywhere. So we're seeing lots of characters all around us in fiction, in the news media, as well as in person. We're seeing loads of examples of characters transmitted from long distances as well. So we live in a time of particularly rapid innovation in telecommunication, and this is probably affecting the speed, flexibility, and migration patterns of character through space and time. And here we have a quote from Marina Warner from her book Phantasmagoria. So she's talking about communication technologies. The first mechanical communication technologies, such as Morse code and telegraphic signaling, disembodied persons in the world of the senses when they made it possible to broadcast human voices over the airwaves and record them for playing back on a gramophone. They could move an individual through time and space, through the electromagnetic field, and the possibility has fundamentally shaped modes of storytelling, not only in literature and film stories, but in the way we tell our lives to ourselves. And so I want to say that letters are an even earlier means of telecommunication. And there too, I am sure, an observant historian could trace the picking up and passing on of specific turns of phrase, accents to handwriting, and styles of signing off across individuals living very far apart and having little to no face-to-face contact. More recent enablers of telecommunicating human character include, of course, video sharing platforms such as YouTube or Twitch, where a popular and already mature culture of vlogging enables people to broadcast a seemingly authentic screen-based character. Internet discussion forums like Twitter and Reddit, when analogous transmission can occur through writing, and virtual reality, where our cartoonish and photorealistic avatars alike will be able to meet in the metaverse and transmit patterns of human behavior there. So I want to say that before the rise of telecommunication technologies, geographic separation meant a greater segregation of human character. And the same thing happened with biological species before there was as much travel. But geographic separation has rapidly become less of a barrier to the transmission of human character. Telecommunications are to human character what super spreader events such as indoor concerts are to viruses. They bridge gaps between infectable nodes, human beings, with greater rapidity and seamlessness. Given that most of my artistic education was derived from videos uploaded by various enthusiasts on YouTube of exhibition walkthroughs and artist talks, obscure old black and white films and out-of-production records, it is no coincidence that a character performance practice like mine did emerge. I was being constantly bombarded with character via the internet. And just to kind of highlight this point about how maybe something about our time is making the transmission of character more frequent and interconnected, I will read, I think, the little analogy in footnote 117. So within globalization, the barriers segregating biological or cultural patterns, languages, species, mannerisms, etc., are fading. Plant seeds travel on our fibrous clothing on the plane back from a holiday. Mice hitch a ride on our ships crossing the oceans, and viruses hop between colleagues at an international conference. So you can see how the same increase in spreading of genes that occurred as globalization intensified must have occurred also with memes as much as with genes. So memes must have started to spread more intensely and widely as globalization intensified. So let's look at the communality of character. Jealousy and empathetic imitation paired together constitute a practice of momentarily being in touch with the staggering historical proliferation of meaning upon which I depend in order to come into expression as the person I am. I am the outcome of this enormous bulk of history, operating as I write at the frontier of its burgeoning skin, carried by its overwhelming momentum. Perhaps the practice of being jealous and thus of being in touch provides me with a means of getting to grips with the forces that urge me forth into being the being that I am, into repeating the arguments, the passions, the disappointments of my ancestors, and contributing to their common value. In a flash of a performative moment, I can glimpse my origins in a revealing synaptic spark. When I pose as Mulan, I reckon with my heritage, while also laying a miniature claim on my legacy. Copying or documenting pose is something that a number of artists have taken advantage of, often in the service of highlighting certain cultural habits or stereotypes. From Harold Offey's Lounging, a photographic series in which the artist imitates the relaxed poses assumed by male black singers on 1980s album covers, to Mariana Wex's photographic studies of gendered gesture and pose. By virtue of the fact that character can be seen as relatively substrate neutral, or it's relatively separate from the thing that's playing it out, and it can travel across hosts, by virtue of the fact that character can be seen as relatively substrate neutral, it becomes a communal entity that lives across instances, a formula. Goffman pointed out that the self, character, emerges out of a scene, but that the props, script, and rehearsal that goes into that scene is part of a historical repertoire older than any of its individual players, is of collaborative manufacture. The performances become then a sort of identity prosthesis, a becoming other or becoming communal, that renders me all the more familiar to myself. Jealousy as the emotional state of character contagion. I propose my use of the term jealousy to mean the energetic or emotional state that directly precedes memetic contagion. As an artist, jealousy is something I need to cultivate and train. It is a precious kind of vulnerability that places me in a state of willful impressionability. This is why art students are taught contextual studies, is it not? To make them sensitive to character, aesthetics, moods, by exposing them to materials to which they must position themselves openly. Is not jealousy the feeling one gets once successfully inspired, breathed into? Like jealousy, is not inspiration always attended by an ache, located in a close dream not yet realized, rather than merely creative bliss? When one is jealous, one has become attuned to the valence of memes, by way of making oneself a willing host. Jealousy is the first step towards intentionally becoming possessed by character, which will be the subject of the next section.